presenter online. I think we'll go ahead and get going with things. I want to welcome everyone. Despite our little glitch problems, we have lots and lots of people here today. I want to thank all of you for coming and participating in another Moving the Dial educational training. Over the next 2 days, really, our goal is going to be discussing and learning more about permanency, how we define it, what are the successes and challenges associated with it, are children in appropriate long-term placements, etc. We're also going to discuss permanency in consideration of some of the disparate findings that we have with regard to Native Americans in our system. We know right now that in Montana, Native Americans are overrepresented in foster care, with about 35 to 37% of our foster care children being Native American, and Native Americans comprising slightly less than 7% of our population. Additionally, we have some data that we're going to share with you with regard to Native Americans tend to have longer stays and have more difficulty attaining permanency, which is something we all want to be discussing and trying to understand better. To give some context to what we're going to talk about over the next 2 days, as most of you know, the department has been working diligently on meeting the requirements of its performance improvement plan. And really, the department has made huge steps and had great success in many areas in meeting benchmarks set by the feds. But one area that continues to plague us a little bit is in the area of permanency. And I think we have to be a little bit honest in talking about permanency and to discuss whether, the timeline standards that the feds have set to attain permanency, there's certainly a lot of debate as to whether those standards really are a best practice. And we certainly can have some of that discussion because as it comes up regularly in conversations about federal timelines, we know a lot more about how to treat various problems such as chemical dependency. And so do the timelines set by the feds really reflect what's reasonable in treating parents with chemical dependency, those type of things. While we can have discussions on that and debate whether the timelines are appropriate or not, the reality is, to a large extent, the department is measured by the feds on those timelines. And overall, it turns out we're doing a pretty good job of meeting the timelines. But we do have some areas where we could improve more, and that is especially in children in foster care over 24 months. And so over the next couple of days here, I would highly encourage all of you to engage in open discussion about the issues and topics that we bring up, and consider ways in which you can improve not only your own work, but the work you do within the system and within the district and the court that you practice in. And before we get going, I want to introduce Nikki Grossberg, who is our Director of Child and Family and Services Division. Nikki has been instrumental in working on the performance improvement plan, and I think more than anyone can tell you, and will be telling you over the next couple of days, what their efforts are and how we are improving our overall performance and meeting the needs of children in the system. Nikki, I don't know if you have something you'd like to discuss or at least welcome everyone and kick off before we turn it over. I know that your department and Mr. Ellis is going to give a data presentation to kind of better educate all of us as to where we sit with permanency in Montana.
Sure, thank you. Really just want to welcome everybody here this morning. I appreciate everyone being here and making time for the Moving the Dial this month, today and tomorrow. I know everyone's calendars are super full and busy, and we're always balancing a variety of things, but really look forward to the conversation today and the breakouts to really understand how do we continue to improve the system across Montana. So just appreciate your guys' time and willingness to be part of Moving the Dial.
All right. Well, I want to stay on track with time-wise. And so, Steve, it's my understanding you have some data that you can share with us.
That is correct. So good morning, everybody. My name is Steve Ellis. I'm with KC Family Programs and the Data Advocacy Team. I think I presented here before, I think it was last year. So I'm excited to be back, happy to present some AFCARS data and just have it open the discussion in terms of kind of where you are around some of this permanency. Well aware that the data that I'm going to present is not nearly as nuanced as you can get out of the state of Montana, out of your system, because these are just data that's been aggregated up to the national level. So I will go ahead and Kelly, if you can kind of help watch chat a little bit. So if anybody wants to throw questions in the chat as we go along, or feel free to come off mute and just tell me to hold up a little bit. There are quite a few slides to go through and not very much time to get through them. I believe all of you, or at least some
I want to
folks,
take cash and then deposit into my checking account.
I think some folks also have data packets that were kind of presented for their particular teams. I'm not sure how those were distributed, but those are out there, as well as the PowerPoint that I'm going to go through. It was in the hands of you all, and you can distribute it as freely as you want to distribute it. So with that said, I will find my little button that I can share. Let's see, share screen. Let's see, Kelly, are you able to see the screen now? Oh, I did share, might help.
Yep, we can.
Perfect. Okay, so let's kind of dive right in and spend the next 20 minutes, like I said, going over some real high data overview. This data is just meant to kind of really start those conversations and discussions, not to end those conversations. So as I mentioned before, the data throughout this system is coming from the AFCARS data set. Please take notice that the national lines that you will see on this presentation and in your packets are from the most recent data submitted to the feds. And if some of you may know that there's a new way that they collect the AFCARS data, so we don't have all states. So your national aggregated line may change over time, but it's pretty close. We don't have 3 states of data. All the report years you see in here will be a 12-month period that ends on 3/31. So it's your AFCARS that went through March of this year. The axis ranges that you see on all the graphs differ, so please pay attention to that. Make sure you're aware of, you're not thinking you're seeing a change, but really what it is an axis range from 0 to 5 instead of 0 to 100. And the American Indian Alaska Native designations we see on the graphs here are determined by a race alone and not in combination. So it's not multiracial American Indian Alaska Native children. It's only children that have been determined as American Indian Alaska Native as a primary race, and no other race is selected. And as we go through, please put your thoughts, your feelings into the chat or questions. So how I've kind of started some of these presentations is I want you to be, if you can, think about your lens that you're looking at this data. So consider, some questions as you go through the data slides, instead of just looking at them as numbers, but think about, through the role of why you're here, how does my role in the agency or within the community play into this data? How can I hold myself accountable to these type of questions? So start posing your internal questions to yourself. And keep in mind that every data point represents a child. So when you see a number on there, 23%, or just a raw number of 500 days. These are representing children, and all these children are impacted by the child protective system. So try to step yourself back a little bit, or be very mindful that these are about kids. And also give you a little bit of self-grace if you're really kind of absorbing the data and thinking about the data, that it takes a whole system to have these impacts, either positive or negative, not one particular entity, a school or a community or just the agency alone can impact these data. Everybody as a team need to come together and work cooperatively to improve the welfare of the children in your system. And data is also meant to open the discussions. So I think I just mentioned it very early on that the data is not the conclusion. It's not we got here, we're done. It's just to open the discussion and to really kind of dig deeper into it, to hopefully start digging deeper into it. So I encourage you to spend a little time determining the outcomes that you want for your kids. So I'm presenting some outcomes here on these slides, but these may not be the outcomes that you really want to focus on within your teams. So really think a little bit deeper about how is it that you want to look at the data. Highlight when you do see things going well in your system, highlight that data points, message it, applaud it, really kind of talk about very positive outcomes, but also don't shy away from those that need to change. So don't just kind of scoot them underneath the rug. Really bring those to the surface also and talk about what we need to do to see a change happen and why we want to see that change happen. And finally, just the fact that you're all here today participating really tells me that you're willing to kind of travel some difficult roads, whether it's truly difficult roads like snow in Montana right now, but you're willing to be a part of this conversation and really want to support the communities, the family, and the kids that you're all serving. So let's kind of dive into the data. So we're going to start with the opening, kind of the child protective system as a whole. So the slide we're looking at here is just a real kind of quick reference to think about disproportionality. Our children at any particular decision point that you're seeing on this slide, for example, screening in or the substantiations or the entries, is there a disproportionate number of kids kind of being impacted there compared to the general population? So in general, to read this type of graph, you can think about this as, for example, this is a national slide, and nationally about 14% of the children are Black African American, which is the dark blue. But if you look across this slide, you can see but of all the kids that screened in for an investigation, 22% were Black African American. So you can already see an overrepresentation of Black African American youth screening in, because you might expect only 14% screen in because that's what's in the general population. So in a system that's pretty equitable, you might see the same thickness of the bar going across the whole sets of decision points. And so Black African American, it jumps to as much as 26% of the kids age out of care. So nearly double what you'd expect to see. When you look at Montana specifically, you see a much more disproportionate involvement with American Indian, Alaska Native children. So you see here that general population of Montana reports about 9% are American Indian, Alaska Native. And as you go kind of deeper into the system, from screening in to substantiations, the entries, the end care, you see again the bars getting thicker. So even though they make up 9% of the population, they're 52, or nearly half of all the kids that have been in care 2 or more years are coded as American Indian, Alaska Native. So once you kind of ground yourself in kind of what's going on in terms of disproportionality and where you might want to focus thoughts, we can now kind of pull back a little bit, and let's start at the beginning and just those kids that are entering care. I'm going to give you a real quick reference on this graph because you're going to see this layout throughout all of them. So I won't spend the time on each of the graph. But the far left will be either your rate of whatever we're looking at. So in this example, it's the rate of children entering care per 1,000 in the general population. The middle graph will be always that your Montana rate, so the 5.8 disaggregated by your race and ethnicity. And the far right will be the, again, the Montana rate disaggregated by age. And in the far left graph here, besides the Montana, which would be the red line, you'll also see a gray line, which is the national rate of kids. And as I mentioned very early on, that national line may change a little bit as we get more, the last 3 states to submit their data. So, but it's approximate. It shouldn't change too much. So entering care, which is where it starts the whole system. You can see Montana's made some dramatic changes in the last 5 years. They've nearly halved the rate of kids entering care, which is fantastic. Now, if you want to use a bar at national, they still have a ways to go. But the direction and the work that's happening in Montana is fantastic in terms of narrowing that front door. At least it feels like it through the data. And you can applaud yourself on that, but then when you start disaggregating, you can still see, you can see where there's disparities happening. American Indian, Alaska Native is at 15 per 1,000, which is nearly 3 times as likely as all the kids in general at 5.8. So American Indians, Alaska Native enter care at a much higher rate. And then if you look at the age, you can see the infants enter the highest at 20.5 per 1,000. So after,
Hey, Steve.
oh,
Hey,
yeah,
Steve.
Kelly?
This
Yeah.
is Kelly. Can I just say one quick comment? I would love to just kind of take one pause just to celebrate. I know you said earlier too, we should applaud the successes. And that entry rate being almost halved in 4 years is quite remarkable, or 5 years. And I just want everyone to just take a moment to take that in. And also pat yourself on the back, because everybody here at this training contributed to that. And then of course, community partners and others as well. But everybody in this call has really contributed to that success. So if you have your little response, like happy face or clap hand or whatever, I would love for everybody just to take a second and put that on your screen, because that is a remarkable achievement. So I just wanted to pause just another second more on that point. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Kelly, for bringing us back to some of my initial points. So absolutely, it's a monstrous achievement, which is great. And you know, I get to see all the different states, and there are not very many, maybe just a small handful of other states have seen that type of reduction, especially in this short period of time, which is great. And you know, I know this moving the dial is all about permanencies and outcomes, but you know, one way to think about it, if you narrow that front door, so you have less kids coming in, there's less kids you have to focus on in terms of achieving permanency. So it might free up some of the back end work where your back end workers are actually have less caseloads where they can really kind of refocus it. So there's definitely a correlation and a tie between that front end narrowing and what can happen in the back door. Okay, children in care. So once they enter care, they are in care. And as you might expect, you can see that same type of drop that happens in care because they're very much related. So if they come in, they enter care, they're probably going to be in care. So you see that significant drop, which is great. And as you might expect on the in care, you also see a high American Indian, Alaska Native at 47, which is even more disproportionate than it was on the entry. Remember, it was about 5 times as likely. Now, was it 5? I think it was 5. I have to go back and look. So it's about the same, I guess, 47. And if you look at the steepness of the line of the American Indian, it's not as steep either. So yes, they've seen reductions, but their reduction rate isn't as great as some other races. The highest has been the multiracial, has the steepest drop that you see. And here, those kids in care, you see a slight switch. Now you can see the 1 to 5-year-olds are in care at a little bit higher rates than the infants, which kind of tells me that maybe you have a higher number of kids entering care, infants, which we saw, but they probably go home much quicker. And so that to capture them at the in-care count, you have less likely to capture them, just the way that point-in-time data works. So you probably have those infants going home much faster than you do the 1 to 5, 6 to 12, and 13 to 17. So once the child kind of enters care, then it gives you the opportunity to have that child achieve permanency. So we're going to break the permanency down into 3 different buckets. So we're going to see permanency within the 12 months of entering care. We're going to see the permanency from within 24 months, and then we're going to see permanency within 36 months. So the first one is within 12 months. And you can see that increasing in permanency. So increasing in permanency, decreasing entries kind of decreases that in-care count that we saw. Both those tie together. Montana is bucking the trend, at least compared nationally. Nationally, you're seeing a reduction within 12 months. Montana has seen an increase over the last few years. You struggle a bit with American Indian, Alaska Native, and you struggle a little bit with the infants. So within that very first 12 months, infant American Indian kids struggle the most in terms of achieving permanency within that 12 months. Now we're looking within 24 months. So this 24 months will capture the first 12 months. So this isn't a unique set of kids, it's an accumulation of it. So we're now at from 41% within 12 months. Now we're up at 68% within 24 months. So by 24 months, about half of those kids that entered care have gone home, or over half, 68% of them. But barely half of the American Indians have, and about 3/4 white kids have gone home within 12 months. And you start seeing the age grouping starting to come together a little bit. They're starting to group up a little bit tighter. In essence, you're not seeing much difference between the ages. And lastly, you have that 36 months. So we've jumped from 68% at 24 months up to 81%. So 8 out of 10 kids that entered care do go home to permanency, which is adoption, reunification, and guardianship within 3 years, 36 months. And American Indian still struggles a little bit, but now you see, other than your adolescents, 13 to 17-year-olds, there's really not any difference of the age groups. So where are they exiting to? So within 3 years, and I only did this for the 3 years because you really can't, adoptions don't tend to happen under 3 years. You can kind of use this graph to kind of give you a flavor of what's happening within 3 years. So within reunification, the blue is the 0 to 12 months. So most of the kids who go to reunification happen in that first, about 68% go to reunification, then a little bit more in the second year, a little less in the third year. So once you get to 36 months, reunification doesn't start happening as often. If they don't go home within 3 years, then they're probably less likely to go home. Those bars get a little narrower. You see just kind of more of the opposite with adoption. So barely any happen within 0 to 12 months, within 1 year, the blue. You get a big chunk or a bigger chunk between 12 to 24 months, but most of your adoptions happen within 24 to 36 months. So that's an area that maybe is there ways to pull that down a little bit. And then guardianships are pretty equally distributed across all periods of time. So guardianships can kind of happen at any point in time. So we talked about the number of months and things, but let's talk about the actual number of days. So these are median days to achieve permanency. And you can see that Montana has been slowly increasing the number of days to permanency, which is not necessarily a positive thing. So you've seen increases in permanency, but if it's taking longer, it probably means you have less kids that you're achieving that permanency on, which makes some sense because we've seen in earlier slides that entries have dropped and in-cares have dropped. So you're a little bit above the national at about 500 days, 547 to achieve permanency. And if you break it down by race and ethnicity, your Latinx kids and your American Indian are quite a bit higher. And your infants, which is at 689 days, take the longest to achieve permanency in terms of the number of days. If you break it down just looking within the type of permanency, reunification is the fastest. Reunifications tend to happen about 300 days, so a little less than a year. Adoptions at about 1,000 days, the median days, which is a little bit higher than national. And then guardianships tend to be about 706 days, so a little bit higher than national. And even though I point out something relative to national, that's not always a good bar to be setting yourself to, because there's policies and practices and everything within the states differ across it, but it gives you kind of a generalized reference. So now we look at the same buckets, but just looking at the number of days by your race and ethnicities. So within reunification, up until 2020, American Indians about had the same rate or same number of days to reunify, the median days, but then they kind of started going the wrong direction in 21 and 22. So it's taken longer the last 2 years for American Indian kids to achieve permanency. Adoption is kind of a similar trend, but it's, it's a little bit closer, 1,000 to 1,200 days. It's kind of, yes, it's higher, but it's not significantly higher. And your guardianship is pretty much kind of right in that same pack. So the time it takes for American Indian kids to achieve a guardianship, if that's the outcome, is very similar to the other children. And the last one on this one is looking at it by the age groups. So you don't see a lot of difference on reunification with by age. They tend to happen at roughly the same time. The lines are pretty close together. Adoption, you start seeing that splitting apart. So the adolescents take the least amount of time, 697 days, and the longest ones are the 6 to 12-year-olds at 1,204 days. And guardianships, the adolescents they happen the quickest, and the other groups tend to happen pretty much the same amount of time. And so then the last data point to kind of
Hey, Steve,
on,
real quick in the chat, Julie Brown had a great question, and I think I know the answer based on AFGAR's data, but I want you to confirm it. That on reunification, it's about when the dismissal occurs, not when a trial home visit occurs, correct?
Absolutely correct. Yeah, that's a good point to make, because you might have a lot of kids on a real long trial return home status, which you might be thinking of it as permanency achieved, you're just monitoring. But you're right, for this data set, we are looking at those kids that finally exit care. That is when the permanency achieves. Yep.
Thank you.
So the last little section I believe on the data is, it's great to be thinking about permanency. It's wonderful. You want to have high rates of permanency happening. You want kids to safely go back home if at all possible. But you don't want to do that at the detriment that they enter care. So you're doing it too quick. You don't have the right services maybe in place, and then all of a sudden they come back into care. So monitoring, what I kind of call a balance measure. So monitoring something to make sure that you're not sacrificing one thing for another's can be important. So when you look at your re-entry into care, and this is defined as the percent of kids that exited to permanency within, or I'm sorry, exit to permanency within 1 year, did those kids re-enter care within the next year? And so it's about, the most current year is about the same as national, about 7%. So about 7 to 8% of your kids that exited to permanency within that 12 months did come back in. By race, it's pretty similar. All this jumping around is because usually the denominator is such a small number, so you get a lot of fluctuations that happen here, but they're packed relatively tight. So about the same on by race and ethnicity. Not nearly as many for the infants. Infants is a little bit lower. So only 1% of those infants that went home within 12 months came back into care within 12 months. So your permanency numbers in general look pretty good, and your reentry is pretty consistent on it, so, which is good. Okay, that's the data presentation. Love questions, thoughts, insights. I'll turn it over to you all.
Before we move on, anyone, last opportunity to ask Steve questions or make comments? Hearing none, we'll move on. We are going to have a panel discussion, and I know I think Maylin is. I'm not sure if Maylin has managed to get on yet. But Sarita Jones Jesse is with the CFSD, Judge Colette Davies from the 13th Judicial District, Chief Judge Stacy Forstar from the Fort Peck Tribal Court, and Katie Green from the Office of Public Defender are going to be our panelists to discuss some of the permanency issues that we want to talk about over the next 2 days. So I guess I will facilitate this conversation somewhat. And my question, first, I guess I would like to ask the panelists to introduce themselves and let us know what it is you do within the child welfare system. And I guess we'll start with Sarita.
Hi, I'm Sarita. I apologize. I've been having technical difficulties with my computer and Zoom today, so I actually jumped on Daria's here at the office, so that's why it says Daria Mowry.
All right. And you work in what region and where are you, Sarita?
So I'm the regional administrator of the North Central region, which is Region 2. So, and I'm out of the hub office here in Great Falls.
Okay, and then I saw Judge Davies is on with the 13th Judicial District. And Judge Davies, can you tell us a little bit about what you do in Billings?
Hi, everyone. I'm Judge Colette Davies, and I am a district court judge, and I have an ICWA court. I collaborate with a couple other district court judges here, and we have divided up our tribes. Judge Souza handles all Northern Cheyenne, Crow, and Fort Peck children, and I typically take all of the other Native kiddos. And that's what I do here.
All right, and Judge Forstar, you work with the Fort Peck Tribal Court, and can you tell us what you do up there with regard to child welfare work?
Good morning, everyone. So at Fort Peck, it's the Assiniboine and Sioux tribes, and we do work with Judge Souza with the ICWA court in Yellowstone County. We have a family court judge who is specific that she does most of the cases. Her and I generally do the child welfare cases, and we have a unique situation with our social services. We don't have a tribal social services like most of the tribes do in Montana. We have a MOU with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the state, the CFS, Child and Family Services. So our caseloads are split up essentially by enrollment of the child. So if the child is fully enrolled with Fort Peck or any other tribe, then BIA can facilitate those cases, and Child and Family Services takes all of the other children. We have membership is about 13,000. About half of those members live on the reservation. We, at any given time, we probably have about 300 children in care. For whatever reason, even though Billings is 300 miles away from us, a lot of our removals do happen there because that's where our medical team flies to. A lot of our removals are drug endangered children, children born with drugs in their system. So we figure that's how we ended up in Yellowstone County, even though we're so far away. But the cases that we have is continuous. So on our docket, it's constant. Every week we have emergency hearings for removals. We have review hearings and our permanency. And I'll talk a little bit more about some other things that our tribe does. But for the chief judge, the positions here are elected. So we have the chief judge and 3 associate judges. So there's primarily myself and Judge Lilly that do all of those cases with ICWA and the social service cases and private custodies as well. So there's a lot that goes on here at Fort Peck.
So Judge Forster, when you say a lot of your removals are happening in Billings, if they happen there, is the placement then occurring? Like if they're in foster care, they're in foster care in Billings primarily?
Sometimes, yes. And that's another reason why we have a lot of kids in Billings is because our foster placements are very slim in Fort Peck. We do have tribal and state license placements, but a lot of them do end up off reservation.
Okay. And I know that Maylin Smith has now managed to overcome the barriers and get on. So Maylin, can you tell us what you do up at CSKT and kind of the situation up there with child welfare work?
So the tribe here is, they have their own social work department, so they're not BIA social work. It is a tribal social work department. And as part of funding that they've got, they have a significant ability to try and do preventive services. So we try and start cases out through preventive and not bring them into the court system at all. And then either through voluntary placement agreements and voluntary protective services agreements, and then stipulating if we have to bring them into it. So we try and minimize the court's involvement to the extent we can. In regards to the number of cases we have, like at Fort Peck, that's going to fluctuate for sure. We probably have open cases probably right now. I probably have around 200. That probably involves about, I'm guessing, between 400 and 500 kids, depending on the size of the families. It's in regards to that. We do a lot of reunifications, and that means that we are not wedded to that 15 out of the last 22 months kind of time frame, recognizing that often it's going to take longer to reunify with parents in regards to that. Also do a lot of kinship placements.
All right.
In regards to it.
And I believe Katie Green with the Office of Public Defender, if you could just introduce yourself as well, Katie.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Katie Green. I'm one of the managing attorneys with the newly formed Family Defense Bureau of OPD. I work under Kelly Driscoll, and I've been overseeing the attorneys in the, let's see, areas in Great Falls is where we have the attorneys that I oversee. But I generally represent parents, sometimes children, in dependency and neglect cases in Beaverhead, Silver Bow, Anaconda Deer Lodge, Powell, Madison counties. That's primarily my practice area. Yeah, and I'm just I'm grateful for this opportunity to participate on the panel.
All right. Well, I guess my question to all of you is, it seems like when I go out and talk to people about the issue of permanency, I find people have different definitions of it. What is your definition of permanency, and to what extent does it really play part in your day-to-day consideration of child welfare work? And I guess, Colette, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, there's obviously the legal definition of permanency, and then there's like the applied definition of permanency. And to me, permanency is a permanent home. To me, permanency means home for children that allows them to leave the foster care system. So whether that's a guardianship, reunification, an adoption, permanency to me is a nurturing, loving home where kids can thrive.
Fair enough. Anyone else have a different definition?
So I would add to that for the tribe here, it's also where they can maintain connection to their cultural identity, their extended family, and their community. So it's just a little expansion, I think, of what Colette has said.
So how do you all plan for permanency? I've been to a number of hearings where we're having a permanency hearing and everybody gets up and says, well, the plan is for reunification, and if not reunification, something else. That's our plan. And everybody says, okay, I adopt that permanency plan. I mean, in your mind, is that a permanency plan? Is that what's happening in your areas? What do you think about that? Smiles from everyone, but you know.
This is Chief Judge Forster. I'll go ahead and share some. So the permanency plans, I mean, as you stated, they are generally generic in that sense. The language is similar, but the tribal code, we go through, there's a section of best interest of the child, there's a section of cultural considerations. So when we're building up in these review hearings to these permanency plans, every hearing we want to hear on a record what is being done with the child as far as keeping them connected culturally, but also in encouraging and helping them grow with their identity and knowing, who they are, where they come from, and what is that going to look like in this permanency plan. And there's having a Native American child, a lot of what we would get at the beginning when we first came on a bench is a powwow. A powwow is a good social event where you're going to see other people from across the nation in Indian country. But what we wanted to facilitate was more of these family trees, their kinship, their hunka, their fictive kin, what the family meaning is beyond just your blood relatives, and also incorporating ceremonies. We've even had naming ceremonies in our permanency hearings or in our adoptions to be able to have allow that child to be able to carry that with them if it hadn't been done already, and doing having cultural I guess spiritual leaders come into the court. We've had other types of ceremonies that we've invited them to. And one of the things we did was we got with our TIPO office, and it's a little out of context, but our Tribal Historic Preservation Office, we worked with them right around COVID time, and we got these cultural components together for the families and children. And she had some interns that were there. So we got these age appropriate things together, like went to craft stores, Walmart, and got all of these packets together that are available to the families that are working with social services to help keep them connected. Some of them are in general, beading, coloring, designs, making a teepee out of, popsicle sticks. Like we had all these like kid type things that we put together. And along with that, history of Fort Peck Indian Reservation. If they weren't from Fort Peck, and we tried to find other cultural relevant items that were not in our area. And it seems that when people know about it, it's a great thing, but we weren't getting it out to everybody. And those that found it were like, why didn't we know about this? So we were trying to figure out, how do we get this out? How do we get this information out, that we do have these services available? You don't have to be from Fort Peck. And it seems that through COVID that put a damper on it, but we still have them available, and we still bring them into the court when families come.
I'll tag on to that. Justice Gustafson, you're accurate. Sometimes during the permanency hearing itself, the words can get kind of rote, and you're saying the same. It can be kind of perfunctory sounding, but at least in what I strive to do is I have status hearings every 6 to 8 weeks on every single case I've got. So I'm not doing just the mandatory statutory hearings. I'm touching base with these families quite a bit. So often by the time we get to the formal permanency plan hearing, everybody in the room is very familiar with what's happening in these kids' lives. And we're all, unless there's been some kind of curveball, we're all aware of, what the most hopeful and the backup goals are. So sometimes those words get, like I say, rote, but really there's a lot more that's happened in the buildup to that hearing that puts all the meat on the bones.
So in that, are you openly discussing Plan B, so to speak? Plan A is reunification, and Plan B could be a number of other things. How early and how often are you discussing sort of, if not Plan A, Plan B?
Well, it sure depends
throughout?
on each case, right? I mean,
Yeah.
each case is so factually unique. And so depending on what the circumstances are with the family, that can really vary greatly. Admittedly, talking about Plan B more often is a good idea at all of these status hearings, just so that parents are on the same page of what that Plan B could look like. But again, if parents are engaged and doing great, we're not really talking so much about Plan B. If parents aren't coming to court and they've really drifted, that Plan B that's not reunification is becoming more of a focus in these status hearings, if that makes sense.
So, Katie, you're out in different areas. What's happening? I mean, what's a permanency hearing looking like for you, or what do you think is really helpful as far as that goes when dealing with parents?
Yeah, I think Judge Davies is right. So as parents counsel, a lot of times, if parents are still involved in a permanency hearing, it's usually a good sign, right? That the case is still active. Reunification is the Plan A, and the efforts are ongoing. Unfortunately, after parents' rights are terminated, then we don't even get notice of permanency hearings. So generally speaking, a permanency hearing, when I see that come up for my clients on a calendar, it's a great thing. It's a good thing. And that is a really, there's a delicate tension there, right? Coming in super early in a case and talking about Plan B. I think about how, the department, sometimes when we're involved in a family engagement meeting, that's a little bit of a gentler, I think, context to bring that up, because you might have family members participating in the meeting. It might be introduced a little bit more gently to say, if not you, then who. It is a pretty heavy idea for a parent to come into court, and it's almost like, well, maybe this, you're not going to have your child, or you almost liken it to like, well, if you die, then who takes over? So that's a pretty heavy thing. And I think Judge Davies is right. These cases are so factually dependent on where parents are at. I do think that can be tricky, though, to especially if you're really trying to engage a parent, to just convince them that yes, legally the department has to have a Plan B, but really to emphasize, hey, Plan A is reunification, and that's what we all really want. A ahead of B, but we have to talk about B anyway.
So you're in your experience in working with parents, Judge Davies has indicated she's having status hearings a lot. And at times I hear, oh, that's just a lot of work for everybody. What's your perception on status hearings as far as getting us to permanency?
I like status hearings. I agree with the judge. I think eyes on these cases and having the court see progress and just keeping up to date with what's going on. I tend to think that the more status hearings we do, the better. 6 months of TLC is a long time. And, hopefully we're doing a lot of out of court work. The department certainly is, but I think it's really important for the parents and attorneys and the judges to follow up and just learn as much as possible about the case.
Sarita, you're as a social worker, how are you interacting with parents and to explain permanency and options, and what's the discussion there?
So I think the department has come a long way with that. We have switched to doing these permanency planning teams right at the beginning of a case. So there is no hidden agenda. Parents know exactly what is required of them. They know exactly what they need to do to hopefully get reunified. We're upfront about always having a Plan B. That is a reality of our job as a child, has that right to permanency. So we're always working 2 plans at once. Our workers hopefully maintain that weekly contact with parents. We do a lot of internal staffing to make sure that we're on track for permanency for a child. A big part of the permanency plan hearings is listening to the child and what the child wants, having their voice heard, having the foster parent's voice heard, having the birth parent's voice heard. So I feel like the department's always juggling all kinds of different players. Everyone has the child's best interests, and we're all working together for that goal. But I do think that we've done a really good job being more upfront with our planning. If we get to a point where we can't reunify, it should not be a shock to the parents. They should be fully aware of their progress. They should be fully aware of what's required of them. We have conditions for return. That's very clear what they need to do. So, in my opinion, we've done a lot to make sure everyone is on the same team. Like I do get like 6 months is a long time between hearings. SAS hearings are great to do the 3-month update. But workers are working weekly, daily with families to make those goals happen.
So are any of you using things like settlement conferences, mediations, those type of things to, when a case is getting along in time, to resolve the permanency issues or other issues?
I think judicial mediation can be a really powerful tool in these cases. And let me just back up one click and say this. Sometimes with these kids who are in the system for so long, it's because we're still holding out hope that mom and dad are going to be engaged. Maybe they're minimally engaged for quite a while. And so these cases can, you know, I'll tend to keep going with them to allow these parents, you know, every opportunity until I really hit the brick wall. And so that I think impacts some of my own timelines. And by the time we get toward looking to resolve this, and if it's looking like it's going to not be reunification, judicial mediation can be a really powerful tool to help parents understand, if that's the glitch, that a guardianship is a great compromise to well, to not have their rights terminated, to still have a pathway forward to being with that child without the, you know, the hard stop of adoption. And sometimes I think that a judge telling that, you know, a neutral judge, somebody from a different, you know, jurisdiction or a different department can come in and say, well, in my experience, this is the handwriting's on the wall, and they can give that perspective to these parents in a way that's, you know, maybe more powerful than just what the social workers are able to communicate and counsel.
So based on what you've just told us, I'm assuming that's happening in Yellowstone County, that you're all maybe serving as mediators in your co-judges' cases?
That's absolutely happening. And like I say, it's usually, you know, happening when we're, you know, when reunification is no longer planning.
So one idea that has been brought up or at times expressed to me is that, you know, judges might just see guardianship as the easy way out, just to avoid a termination hearing, and that's kind of why we're seeing more of them. Is that your experience?
No.
Okay, tell us why.
You know, I think that guardianships, like I say, are a good solution for parents who are for whatever reason not able to completely reunite with their kids, but maybe there's still a glimmer of hope. Like take an incarcerated parent, somebody who's going to be in custody for a long period of time. A guardianship is a really nice solution because, you know, maybe the Department of Corrections is working with somebody while they're in a custodial placement to help them rehabilitate, and they're coming back out, and eventually there could still be a relationship with this child. I think that these guardianships are really powerful tools to allow this family unit and this family connection to still have an opportunity for a path forward. So that's why I think I'm seeing more of them, is maybe even it's just a philosophy of my own that's facilitating that. But to me, adoption, and it's not that it's not necessary in some cases, because it really is, but if we can avoid that hard stop and give parents those opportunities, I think it's a good alternative.
Maylan, do you use guardianships or? I think at one time you told me you tried that never to terminate, and so
We almost never terminate.
okay.
We use family engagement meetings. We try and get consent as much as possible. We suspend parental rights for customary adoptions, but even under a suspension of parental rights, the parent always has the opportunity of coming back in and demonstrating that they can be a fit parent that can provide a home that is better for the child than their current placement. So they always have that option of coming back in. We do consent to guardianships, and they retain visitation rights. They retain contact under those consents. And then we do consents to customary adoptions and suspension of parental rights. So as a general rule, the only time I terminate is when I have an unknown birth father.
So how frequently do people come back in?
It isn't frequent, but probably I've been here for almost 5 years now. And I think I've had 6 times where a parent has come back in, and we've actually ended up changing the placement and placing the child back with a parent.
And have those been agreed upon, or are they contested hearings, or what?
One of them was contested. Generally, they're agreed upon when the child has been placed with extended family.
Okay, yeah. I mean, one of the concerns that just keeps getting expressed with guardianships, which is sort of a guardianship myth, is that, you know, they're easily undone. And so, you know, really that hasn't shown to be the case. And it sounds like the same is true unless it's an agreed upon deal in at least the tribal court that you're working in.
That's correct.
So what do you all think are the biggest barriers to reaching permanency? Somebody's needs to mute
I was gonna say, for
themselves.
me, it's the lack of services.
Oh, you're now muted, Maylan.
There we go.
There you go.
I said, for me, it's not being able to access the services we need. Usually it's some kind of a treatment program. That's the hugest barrier we have in working with families or services.
Katie, what do you have different opinion on that?
Well, again, it kind of harkens back to, you know, what's your definition of permanency and what's your role in the system? Because I think for our clients, again, permanency usually is hopefully reunification. And yeah, but I would agree with Maylan on that. How long does that take? And just as you hit on it too, sometimes these timeframes, I just don't know that they fit the reality of the situation for the family, especially if a parent is struggling with the disease of addiction. Yeah, finding services that can cause kind of delay in getting services set up for the family, and just lack of resource providers. You know, we live in, I think I'm actually lucky, probably being in the Southwest Montana area, is that we do have some options for service providers. But finding folks to do that it can always be a struggle too. Again, though, generally speaking, when we're seeing permanency hearings as parents attorneys, it's generally you know, because our clients our parents are still actively working, and we're heading towards reunification. Yeah, so I don't know what the barrier is. I guess to just to add on to something about the guardianship issue, I thought that this was a really good point too. Just as you mentioned, the myth that guardianships are somehow less permanent. I think that I don't have numbers or statistics in front of me, but as far as quote, the success of a guardianship versus the success of an adoption. I think we see similar success rates on both things, or good outcomes for kids, regardless of whether it's a guardianship or an adoption. And from a parent's perspective, a contested termination, it's the death sentence of your parental rights. So in the cases that I see, so much of the litigation things, discovery motions, expert witnesses, those kind of issues, they're geared towards that termination hearing. So that's kind of the end all, and where that all of that legal focus and work is headed, if that's the pursuit. Just because the right to parent is a constitutionally protected one. So there's a lot of effort that goes into, I think, the defense of parents' rights when we hit the termination phase. Compare that to a guardianship. I would say most of the guardianships that I see involve the family being on board with it, the parents being in agreement with it. And Judge Davies, I think that idea of judicial mediation is an excellent way to talk about that and to get people on board for that.
So I have a couple questions following up on the guardianship. Maybe Sarita, do you know what the funding is that the department, funding that the department accesses with regard to guardianships? I don't know if you're the right person to ask that question, really.
I do know that if
Okay.
you're not 4E eligible, then it comes straight out of the state's general fund. So if that was unlimited and we had tons of money to utilize that way, I think it would be a different story. But behind every guardianship, there's a lot of different pieces. There's a lot of different funding sources. There's licensing that goes into it. There's different wait periods for guardianship. So it's really hard to say that it is, an unlimited source of funding to help. And I don't like to base everything on funding, but that's kind of the reality of working with a state agency, is the money has to come from somewhere to help fund these. And so if it doesn't meet that 4E criteria, then that comes straight out of that.
Okay, so if it's a family member, you can make 4E funding, right?
Right.
And if
the child still meets that, because sometimes children don't meet that 4E funding, even if they're with a family member.
Okay.
There's actually a whole unit in the state that handles that knows way more about than I do, and I'm probably slaughtering it. But I just know that those are important questions we have to ask, because a lot of our families do need that financial assistance.
Now, my understanding is also there is some that 4E may be available as well as with fictive kin if the child meets the criteria, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
If the child meets the criteria, that's the big thing.
But if you have children meeting, and maybe I understand 4E funding is very difficult to figure out all of the ins and outs of, but if you have a child that's meeting 4E funding, right, for foster care and things like that, right?
I'm sorry.
So is that a different consideration when you go to guardianship as far as whether 4E funding? I mean, don't we at the outset of a case generally know if a child qualifies for 4E funding?
I think sometimes we do know, and sometimes they can lose it during the case. I don't think that when we make decisions internally on where a child is either going to be adopted or guardianship, like the funding plays into it, but that isn't the whole criteria.
Right. I just was trying to help educate folks that there is, I mean, the guardianships aren't as I mean, there's a lot more that goes into them than just deciding how we're going to preserve a family unit with a guardianship. And the unfortunate reality for almost all decisions that we all make is there's financial implications to that and how they do get funded. In Montana, we do have quite a few of our guardianships are funded through our general fund. And of course, if we did nothing but guardianships, we would have to go out and change a lot of our funding or figure out some additional streams of income there. But I guess just for the discussion, we do have other options for guardianships under Title 72. And I know occasionally we do run into families who really aren't seeking to have any subsidy with the adoption. That I guess you practitioners out there, we might think about sort of those type of things. And so, and I guess I wanted to ask Maylin, I guess I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more, because Brooke Barker Taylor in the chat says that you would be able to further speak to this idea of customary adoptions. I don't know what she's referring to, so maybe you can educate us.
Sure, and I'm guessing that Judge Forstar also can share how they do it at Fort Pack. So we have two ways of doing customary adoptions here. The first way is truly traditional. It doesn't come into the court system at all. It's done purely on a family arrangement. So those are not part of the system at all. And then under the tribal code, we have the option of doing customary adoptions. And that is with extended family. It also recognizes the fictive kin piece, which I think is of greater importance often in Indian country, where the definition of family is perhaps more fluid than what you see in the anglicized system. So we have the ability to place children under a customary adoption arrangement that again does not require that we terminate parental rights. And it also recognizes that at some point in the future, that could be set aside and the child could return to the parents if the parents reach a point where they can care for the kid.
All right. So I'm curious, I guess I'd like to get each of your ideas on sort of what, if you were going to give us your sage advice on getting to permanency, the top 3 considerations that you have, what are they? We'll put you on the spot, Judge Davies.
I'm not sure I totally understand the question, to be honest. So are you asking the top 3 things that can get us to permanency, or my top 3 things that I consider? I mean, what are you asking exactly?
I'd like to know, so your top considerations in getting a child to permanency, what do you think are the 3 most important things you could be doing?
Oh, my own role in getting them
to
see. I really do believe in these status hearings because it encourages engagement. And it allows me to do temperature checks on what's happening and allows me to interact with parents very directly and to give them accolades or to give them encouragement or frankly, sometimes stern words, anything to get them to be involved. So status hearings for me are, I would say, my number 1. Yeah, and my other top 2 things that I do to achieve permanency, you know, for me as the neutral, I just really try to work with these families when they're in the courtroom, and that's my main thing. I'm going to wrap all 3 of them into the one, really engaging with these families and trying to encourage them. And just staying, you know, for me on top of all of my cases. My guardian ad litem is Chris Copenhaver. She's amazing at always keeping me informed. If something's happening in the background, she's able to let me know and we can get everyone, you know, into court. I'm always open to being fluid with my schedule so that if something's cropped up, we can have a hearing on very short notice, even if it's just telephonic. I mean, just staying involved and staying engaged to me is the number 1 thing.
As a practitioner, Katie, what's the number 1 consideration or thing that you're doing with regard to permanency? And I realize you're in a different, so it's still different because as a parent's attorney, I don't know that you're super worried about, I mean, the timeline of permanency as opposed to, you know, working to reunite with your parents. And so what, I guess, you know, in light of that, how do you meld those two?
Justice, you're exactly right. And in fact, I wrote this down when we were talking about the statistics and the numbers. That is so and I mean, I'm so glad to hear it and see it in the graph and the chart that reunification situations are the fastest by day for all kinds of kids. That's what I saw in the chart. So that's awesome because that's plan A. I would note that interestingly, guardianships are second fastest to achieve permanency according to those numbers. So adoptions are the last. But again, usually we're by the time we're doing an adoption in the state court system, that means termination. So we're not, you know, I can't speak to a lot of those cases, but I guess the ones that we do see, it's reunification efforts are being made, and that's awesome. And then I am really excited, and I encourage a lot of times if reunification is not going to happen, for parents to really accept and get on board and be really supportive of guardianships, especially family guardianships.
So Sarita, from a social worker's perspective, what do you think the most important things you can do to assure a case is reaching permanency in a reasonable period of time?
I think the most important thing to do is we all work together as a team for the child's best interests. The child has a voice and the team needs to hear that voice. And that part of the team also includes the parents. The parents need to have full transparency of what they're doing and what they can do better for the child to get their child back. I think we focus a lot on the parents and their treatment, and often we forget there's a little face behind each of those parents that are waiting, you know, hopefully to be reunified someday. I think what we can do better is when we work together as a team and we can all be on the same page for treatment for parents and what the child needs the most, that provides that child that stability. To me, those are the cases that seem to get to permanency faster, and most of them result in reunification. The data does show that reunification is quickest, and when you get a parent that's engaged and actively working their treatment plan and meeting with their attorneys, listening to good legal advice as far as working with the department and providers, those are all different pieces of the puzzle that need to go together for this child's best interest. And I think sometimes when you have a really young child, it's hard to hear their voice, but they still have that right. They have that right to have that home that they know is going to be permanent for them, the right to enjoy their childhood in a stable environment. And it's a very case by case scenario for us. That's why each case gets their own court hearing. That's why each case has attorneys assigned to it to represent each party, because it is so important that we all work together and not forget our end goal is that reunification. And we also have all these little faces around us that need that permanency, that need that childhood stability.
So Judge Forster, it sounds like you have quite a few of your Native American youth, if they're removed in Billings, maybe placed in Billings or from afar. I'm just kind of curious, what do you or does the tribe do to assist in permanency in those cases, as well as ones that are a little closer to home?
So it is difficult. Looking at permanency, a lot of the focus that we have in the court hearings, because we do have review hearings and status hearings, we have a lot of hearings before we even reach permanency. But we utilize family healing to wellness court. Most of the parents that are involved with any type of removal case, they are referred over to family healing to wellness, where they.
So what is that?
So it's a specialty court, and it's almost the same thing as the adult drug court, but ours focuses on family healing to wellness. So anybody that has any type of crime that involved a child can come in. Anybody who's involved with social services. I'm gonna try to talk through it. They were doing work next door and the fire alarm went off because there's dust all over in here. I was like, of all timing for this to happen. But one of the things I wanted to mention about the barriers with this is methamphetamine and fentanyl. The recovery for this addiction is years. And so family healing to wellness court, we have clients that have been in there, I'm so sorry, for like 3, 4, sometimes 5 years. They're still in their recovery, and it takes them so long because we've had people that are right at graduation and they relapse. So they know that they need further assistance. And so this whole time that the children are in care, we're like, okay, we have all of these plans in place for them, and we're still working toward reunification. And these statutes, we're way beyond them. Yeah, we're not tied to them, but for funding purposes, there's this other component that we still have to be aware of. The tribe itself, our statute says 12 months. At 12 months, there has to be a permanency hearing. What that consists of is everything that we've talked about, the plans in place. Reunification is always number one, but what are the other options that we need to talk to the families about? And at 12 months, we're barely getting parents engaged. They probably went to treatment. They're struggling with their sobriety. And we're looking at what else can we do to assist them. So for the tribal perspective, within tribal court, we have resources available. And I hear people talk about resources. It's really hard in Northeast Montana. Like the treatment facility we use for inpatient, the closest one is Sheridan, Wyoming. So, and there is one in Billings, there's one in Great Falls, but the ones that we have contracts with, the first priority is Sheridan, Wyoming. So we get them to treatment, we bring them back. Fort Peck lacks sober living units. They have a lot of groups and outpatient, but there's no actual place for them to go to. So they go back to the homes where their addiction is still going with other family members, and getting them to the point where we're changing those lifestyles and making better choices can come years after the removal. So making those active efforts, the one that we struggle with is finding family, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the placements that we have are off reservation because we don't have a lot of individuals licensed on a reservation, whether they're family or not. They do have the option of getting a tribal license, and state would recognize that as well. They could get a state license. And then we have family members that struggle with historical information. If they had a child neglect in 1970, it's going to come up when they do the state background check, and maybe it was a one-time thing. They still cannot get state license with that. Yes, we know there's a grievance and they can appeal it, and a lot of them just don't know how to do that process, or they just get intimidated by it and they give up. So they can't get licensed. By the tribe, we try to offer free legal advice to get people, because we do have a public defender's office, but not every parent has an attorney. They don't have representation in the court. And that's, I believe Danette Love is on, but they did apply for a grant with CASA for the advocates, and that's going to be something new to Fort Peck. There are lay advocates, public defenders, but public defenders are primarily busy with criminal matters. They can represent parents, and sometimes there are court orders where they have to because of situations with parents' disabilities, and getting them representation in family court is really hard. So the judge has a big role of making sure that they understand what the process is, and what their options are and what's going on. We do have social service that with the state, they try to have those meetings, those family meetings. And I believe there's just a lot of the active efforts with finding considering the fictive kin, and also the hunka, because we talked about customary adoptions. The tribe here does do traditional adoption. It doesn't terminate the rights of the parent. but it is a combination of the actual ceremony and then the filing in court. So ours combines them both, the tradition, custom, and the legal portion of it. And that's another option that can happen besides just straight adoption. And we've had just recently, we had a kid in care, and this just happened yesterday, actually. He's been in care since 2009. And
Yikes.
he had,
It's a long time.
it is. And he kept blowing out of every placement. He had a higher level of care. He just had so much going on with him. And it ended up being a guardianship with his aunt, who was formerly incarcerated, but she couldn't get licensed. She couldn't, there was just so many barriers with that. And a lot of the family members had passed away. And he finally got the guardianship yesterday since 2009. And she was one of them that had, made all these lifestyle changes for the past 2 decades, but could not get license. Placement was just difficult. And we have a lot of those cases on our docket where it's such a long period of time. And then our tribe and other entities question, how can you leave them on in care for so long? And it's like, because we haven't exhausted all of the families that are available. Child and Family Services does a Seneca search. A lot of people come into court and they're like, well, we don't even know this family, but they gave us a letter. Then we have people come in and say, I was never notified and I'm interested. I can be a placement. And it's really, and those are legal notices that are in our paper that people step up and come forward. And so what does the active effort look like on the social service side of how that's happening? Those are the things that we do in a status and review hearings, is try to say, okay, we've had mom and dad, and now we have grandparents giving us names. Have we looked into these names? And we started the tribe to do an actual family tree. And then from those families giving us other names of people that they have the fictive kin type relationship. And looking at our tribal code, we're looking at doing revisions because with fentanyl and methamphetamine and the time frame, but also the effects it's having on the children. So in our review hearings, we have to look at what is the considerations that we need to take into note for long-term care of the child, because it doesn't always come out at birth. It comes out at different stages in their life. If they have some type of learning disability, if there's going to be physical needs, their emotional trauma that's been treated, untreated, there's mental health capacity. So there's a lot that we try to take into consideration when we're building these permanency plans and making these decisions.
What I'm hearing from you is that have sort of the never give up on the family approach, which I think is somewhat different than what we encounter in other areas. So we're getting close to our time. We did have 2 kind of questions come up in the chat. Nikki Grossberg has indicated she could probably answer some of our funding questions. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but Kelly Driscoll asked, how does 4E work for adoption? Are those ever general fund subsidized? And so maybe we can wrap up a little bit with Nikki giving us a short tutorial on guardianship versus adoption funding.
Sure. So just real quickly, we do have about 11% of our payments that go out for adoptions are general fund. Right now, we're at about 45% of our payments for guardianships are general fund. One of the big differences is you have to be 4E eligible for both of the payments, but with the adoptions, the AFDC eligibility, so kids have to meet the AFDC eligibility at the time of removal. Adoptions have moved away from that. So now any child above the age of 2, that criteria does not affect or does not play into the ability to use 4E funding, and guardianships AFDC still does apply across all kids. So that is a big factor. In addition to there are pieces, there's less with some of the court, you guys are all familiar with the different court orders that need specific language, and our permanency hearings need to be current for 4E to apply. There's different standards for what court documents need to be in play for adoptions than guardianships. So truly through the federal lens, there are less requirements to meet the 4E eligibility for a child under adoption than there is guardianship. But that's in a nutshell. I could talk a lot more about it, but that is kind of an ongoing component. With that, AFDC eligibility will always be a problematic for guardianships.
All right. And earlier I did see somebody's hand up earlier, but I don't know if that person still has any questions. Not hearing any, we're right at 11 o'clock. We are going to take our break. I want to thank panel members for coming today and sharing what's going on in their areas and their thoughts with how we can better attain permanency in a timely manner. And we will resume, Julie, am I correct, at 11:10 to
Yes.
talk about with some folks that have lived experience in our system.
Yes, that's correct.
All right, so we'll go ahead and take a break. And so you can turn your cameras off and come back at 11:10.
So Kevin, Julie, I was just going to stay on and see, make sure we have the panel members. I don't know if either of you guys are still around. And Kelly.
Yeah, I'm here, Nikki. I have not seen other than Zach.
I'm
Yep,
on.
Ashley should be on. Terry, you turned on, so great. Ashley, if you'll turn on and Veronica, perfect. So the one that we don't have is Tiana
Which one's Ashley? Ashley, which one? Ashley.
Matson. So her camera's on.
Yeah, I don't see her though on here.
Ashley, say something and he'll pop up into the front.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you are. Oh, I guess.
It-
Okay, I've been letting people in, and I guess I must have missed you. I'm sorry.
You're good. So Nikki, Tiana actually emailed me today. I think she meant to email you, but from our email yesterday, it just came to me. She had emailed me saying she had a family emergency and wouldn't be able to attend today.
Perfect, thank you.
Kevin, is there a way to make the panelists kind of like spotlighted so they're
Yeah,
not
I can
in the
see-
mix of all the tiny faces?
So yeah, some of that view you can do yourself, but yeah, I can spotlight them. Yes.
Thank you.
Zach, did you take a break or are you there too?
I'm here, but I'm gonna run and take a break here real quick.
Perfect.
Okay, super good.
So for those of you who just jumped on, we have a 10-minute break. And so Kevin will get you guys put into that panel. You have the questions with Kelly and but we'll start about 11:10. So feel free to keep your cameras on or off or whatever you need to do.
So, Nikki, who's not going to be here?
Kiana,
What's her last name?
Plain Feather, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Kevin, am I allowed to take a break?
No. How about Ashley Warden? I'm not seeing her.
She's not going to be here.
Okay.
Yep. So she was not able to make it either.
Okay, so that's two. Let's see here. 1 second. And then I got Zach. Veronica.
Correct. Anderson.
Oh, it's Anderson?
Yep.
Okay, because that's part of the problem sometimes.
Gotcha. Yep. You had the ham, but her.
Ham, yeah, and I was
is
looking for
Anderson.
Ham and I'm not finding her. Okay, so. Okay, yes. And then let's see who was the last one. I think one more. Okay, Ashley. How about Terry?
Yep.
She-
Teresa Majors is there.
Okay, got her. Spotlight for everyone. Let's see here. Spotlight a bunch of.
Kevin, are you able to spotlight them all at the same time?
No, you're not. Like, I'm not seeing that. I can do one at a time. I'm trying to figure out if there's a way to do multiple.
No, they're.
Does anybody know? Is Kelly? She's probably in the air. I mean, I can do one at a time for sure.
Kevin, I think you have to click on the little button at the top right and just keep adding people to the spotlight.
So I can add them to the spotlight, but I'm not seeing where I can add more than one.
Oh,
At a
can you go to
time.
each of them individually?
That's what I'm doing right now. I'm trying to do that, and once one person's spotlighted, I got the others tend to go away.
So Kevin, it says choose spotlight for everyone, right? Hover over the video of the participant you want to spotlight and click from the menu, choose spotlight for everyone. To spotlight additional participants up to 9. Do those 1 and 2, the steps I just said again.
So did you just Google those steps?
Yep.
So I'm okay. I'm gonna have to do that. So do you have a second to kind of guide me through this? So what were you saying then?
Well, it says at the top of your screen, but I'm not the host, so I don't have this.
Right.
Hover over the video of the participant you want to spotlight and click.
Okay.
From the menu, choose spotlight for everyone. To spotlight additional participants, you do that again over theirs.
Let me grab. Okay, let me get to the people that need to be spotlighted. All right, so. Do they have to have their video on to be spotlighted?
Yes.
Okay, because, okay, let's try that. Okay, spotlight for everyone. Okay, perfect. Veronica. So spotlight. Could I get Zach to see? I'll just like
Our video's on for you.
okay, thanks. I just gotta find you on the list here.
I'm helping you here, Kevin. So we got Ashley and Veronica there, or Terry and Veronica are now on too.
Okay.
And you need to add Kelly Driscoll.
Terry, I got on. Ashley, I got on. Veronica, Zach. Who am I missing here?
Kelly Driscoll.
Oh. She wasn't on my list, so I don't think I'm going to add her.
Well, then we have no facilitator.
Yeah, that's everyone.
Justice Gustafson, it's past 10 after. Do you want me to get started?
Let's go ahead and get started.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining us again this morning. We're lucky now to be joining a panel of folks with lived experience in the child welfare system who are going to share with us some of the successes and barriers they encountered in their own experience with DN cases. And so I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce yourself, and then we've got a series of questions to ask them. So maybe we'll start with Ashley.
My name is Ashley Matson. I am a youth with lived experience and also a child protection specialist in Butte.
Thanks, Ashley. I'll just go across the screen next. Terry.
You're muted, Terry.
Terry, I was a child in foster care. I am a foster adoptive parent, and I currently work for CFSD as an admin support specialist, supervisor.
Thanks, Terry. Veronica.
I am Veronica Anderson. I am a youth with lived experience and now an intake worker in the Butte office.
Thanks, Veronica. And Zach.
Hi, my name is Zach Canada. I'm a peer support specialist here in Missoula, Montana, and I'm a parent with lived experience in the child welfare system. In 2017, while I was in active addiction and homeless, my daughter was removed at birth and placed with foster parents.
Thanks, Zach. The first question, and this is going to be for everyone on the panel, is if you can speak to how long you were separated from your family and what you did to stay connected to your family or your children and to keep those connections. And maybe we'll go to Ashley.
So, again, my name is Ashley. I'm an intake worker in Butte. My family had department involvement for about 3 years. I was separated from my sister and my brother for right between 1.5 years to that 2-year mark. And then my sister and I were in the same home. My brother was separated from us. And to keep us connected during that time in care, the biggest thing I think was I was not able to talk to either of my parents unless we were at the office. And due to that lack of connection, was really hard. I did have a really close established relationship with my mom when we were removed. And it kind of made me feel like I had to sneak to have a conversation with my parents. My placement didn't let me talk to them via phone or FaceTime, anything like that. And then with me and my siblings, we were not able to see each other outside of department involvement either, though it was recommended by the department that they maintain that sibling contact. They did not. So for about a year and a half, 2 years, I lost a lot of time with my younger brother who was in that different home, which was really hard for me and my sister.
Harry, can you share next?
Sure. So we have a couple extremes for the kiddos that we had in care and adopted. One kiddo, we weren't able to maintain family connection. Some of that was mental health issues. We were able to keep kids connected a little bit, but the other home wasn't inclined to have them spend time together. That placement was a lot more difficult because the connection was important to us, and now we don't have that connection. One of our other kiddos had lots of connections. We went to the park, sent his mom's pictures. She had my phone number to call whenever, pick her up, take her to doctor's appointments, did some of those first because we had him as a baby. So she was able to go to his birthday party and Halloween and some of those bigger events as well as small things. All three of our kiddos were separated from their siblings. And we've worked really hard to try to keep those connections there, to spend time with them doing whatever they're comfortable with doing. So whether go to the park or just whatever everybody felt comfortable with.
Thanks, Terry. Zach, do you want to share how long you were separated from your family and what you tried to do to stay connected during that time?
So my daughter was removed at birth in February 2017, and she spent a total of 17 months out of care, placed with the foster family. And during that time, for the first 10 months of the placement, I was still deep in active addiction, and I was offered the opportunity to have 2 3-hour visits with my daughter each week. And because of the place that I was in not engaged in recovery or taking steps on my treatment plan, I would sometimes show up and sometimes I wouldn't. And it wasn't until that 10-month mark where I and a few other components that I was able to get into an inpatient treatment facility. And after I came out of that 30-day facility and landed in a sober living home, I had to make some adjustments and was able to where I could have 1 2-hour visit once a week, but show up for my daughter clean and and be actually present in my daughter's life for the first time. And I was able to maintain that for the next 6 months. And during that time, as the people in my treatment team and the foster family seeing me show up clean to those visits, we opened up and started sharing photos and videos. So I have videos that they sent me through my caseworker of my daughter's first steps. And I got to meet them at the door when they to put my daughter back in their car when they came to pick her up at the end of the visits. And the relationship started to become something where I had a relationship not only with my daughter, but with the people who were taking care of her.
Yeah. I'm glad that you had that. Veronica, do you want to speak to how long you were in care and what efforts were made to keep you connected to your family?
Sure. I first was removed when I was 7 due to some situations with my mom. She was just out of control. I was placed with my maternal grandparents for 6 months, and during that time, I remember having visitation at the office frequently, and then doing a graduated program back into my mom's care as she made progress. The second time that I was legally removed, I was 13, and I had spent 5 years in foster care before aging out. Visitation was a little bit different during that time. My mom had passed away due to liver cirrhosis. In the meantime, and my dad was a very aggressive person, and my ongoing worker was very intimidated by him, so we weren't allowed to have contact. So I was like Ashley, and I was sneaking around having contact with my dad and doing what I could to maintain that relationship. I was also eventually separated from my little sister, and we did do phone calls, and we had supervised contact when we were able to.
Thanks for sharing, Veronica. Our next question is, what were the barriers to keeping connection, the type of connection you would have wanted to have? And how do you think that could have been improved? And if you want to speak to kind of how you try to implement those types of improvements in your current work with families, I think folks would be interested in hearing that too. Anyone, this is a question really for anyone. So we could start with Ashley, or if anybody has got an answer right away that they want to jump in on, that's fine.
Yeah, I can go. So I think some of the barriers to keeping that connection, again, like the lack of follow through with our placement, maintaining that sibling contact and not allowing us any contact with my parents unless a CPS worker was present. And at the time of department involvement, when me and my siblings were removed, my dad was incarcerated at MSP in Deer Lodge. I was not, in the time I was in care, I was never offered any visit with him, phone call, in person. So I was unable to maintain that connection. I do think if there had been appropriate services put in place, like family therapy from the very beginning, or just overall having more supports within the case, that there may have been a faster outcome of sobriety with my mom and then my dad once he was not incarcerated anymore, and just my family being more successful. And then kind of with the work I do now, obviously with the lack of connections and follow through, I always do try to make sure that placements are, if they're not comfortable with allowing parents to have phone calls, I facilitate phone calls. If parents are incarcerated, I try to work around that and make sure we're still able to maintain that, because I do know that that connection with parents as well as siblings is very important when the department becomes involved, because it does change your life completely.
Other panelists want to weigh in on that?
I think the biggest barrier we had with keeping a connection with our family, the biggest thing was my dad's aggression. My dad was a very hostile and violent human being at that time, and then having a worker who was easily intimidated by him, it made it very difficult for either one of them to want to engage in any sort of communication. And then with the amount of trauma that our family had been through, it was super hard for us to communicate in like a decent way. And so having family therapy, I think, would have been a huge game changer for us, especially in the very beginning. And I think having a worker who was not so intimidated by my dad would have been helpful. When I'm working with clients and kids and parents now, especially, I always just remind myself, like, how would I want my dad or my sister to be treated in this situation? And how would I work on engaging someone like my dad, who just has such a dislike for the department?
Thank you for sharing. Zach? Yeah, thanks, Zach.
So one of the major barriers for me as a single father working on reunification is at the time, in 2017, early 2018, there were there are very limited sober living options in Missoula, and there were no sober living options for men with children to be placed with their child during their time engaged in treatment and working through the reunification process. Um, and and so that made there were programs which the landscape has changed a little bit, like Michelle's house up in Billings, and we used to have Carol Graham here in Missoula. And we have some other things that are changing as far as what some places for women with children. But for men with children, today the landscape's changed a little bit. We have 2 sober living homes in Billings that now you're able to have a single father with his child or children, and they can engage in treatment options. But at the time in 2017, 2018, there was only one option for a sober living home, which you needed to have a co-occurring diagnosis to be able to get into in Missoula. And so I landed in Helena, and I'm grateful that the family that took care of my daughter, I'm absolutely grateful for the wonderful time that they spent with her and the part of our lives that they are today. But if there had been father-child supportive services available, I could have had the opportunity, and other fathers could have had an opportunity to have a chance at reunification or have the opportunity to be parenting while they were engaging in treatment during those early formative. Another piece that came up in my case in particular was we didn't have regular treatment team meetings throughout my case. The case was split between the Missoula and Butte offices, and so we didn't have regular treatment team meetings. And in the time that I worked as a peer support specialist in Missoula, I've gotten to see and be a part of seeing that not be something that happens with every family. That most of the families that I've gotten a chance to work with as a peer specialist, we get to have the opportunity to have those regular recurring check-in and treatment team meetings to celebrate the wins and to address the challenges that need to be worked on.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. Terry, do you want to speak to some of the barriers to keeping the connection between siblings and children and their birth families? Oh, and you're muted.
One of those days with that mute button. We ran into a barrier with the first case of multiple caseworkers. It was hard to build a connection. It was hard to get information, share information, develop relationship because there were so many workers assigned to his case. Our other 2 kiddos had more consistent caseworkers, and I felt like the communication was better. I could ask more questions. I got more answers, which allowed us to develop relationships with birth families. The barriers to connections with birth families, my kiddos were in separate homes, and some were closer to adoption than mine. And I have found that adoptive parents, birth parents have different perspectives on those relationships, those sibling relationships, those relationship with birth parents. And I've ran into both ends of it. I ran into an adoptive parent who has one of my boys' siblings, and they're not interested in him knowing them. They are pretty firm on keeping that boundary. It's something I haven't been able to go any farther with. It's their parent, and they have a right to make that decision. I have a completely different belief. I really firmly believe that children do better when they have their birth parents, their bio families. And I have strived even now that I've adopted and have guardianship to ensure that those connections are there wherever I can. So the other piece to that is being able to having more education about what is appropriate and what is not, and the importance of those connections. Early on in foster parent training would have been beneficial. I think that that is there more now. Had I not had roles that I've had in my life, I probably would not have realized how significant that role is or those relationships are.
Thank you, Terry. This is a question specifically for Veronica and Ashley. Can you share about your experience aging out of foster care? What that was like, what things you would have changed or would have helped you better as a youth in that situation?
Sure, I can go first, Ashley, since you have the last couple times. So I was never able to return home or find permanency. My dad's rights were terminated when I was 14. I actually testified against him to have his rights terminated. I knew my dad was not in a place in his life where he could appropriately parent my sister and I, and keep us safe based on the things he was doing. I also really struggled to maintain a consistent placement because of all the trauma that I had as a child. So I would self-sabotage. I felt like every adult I came into contact with didn't understand what I was going through and that they would hurt me or leave me in some way. So I bounced from placement to placement until I turned 18, and then my social worker gave me a $500 check, and I used it to buy a car, and I knew I was going to be homeless. So I enrolled in college at Montana Tech and got into a dorm room. It was hard because I didn't have someone to look for and to like talk to about adult things like finances and appropriate relationships. So I learned a lot of things the hard way, and had to do a lot of things by trial and error. I do think that it was beneficial with all the group homes and stuff that I was in. I did a lot of therapy and a lot of different services. So that helped me a lot in the choices that I continued to make into adulthood.
Appreciate you sharing that. Ashley?
So my time in foster care when I aged out, I think one of the biggest things that I struggled with is I didn't feel like my opinion was really valued and there wasn't a lot of support. I wasn't involved in any case planning when I was removed. I was told that I did have Chafee. I, however, did not have any contact with Chafee. I feel like if there would have been contact with Chafee, I may have had a little bit more insight on what it would look like when I aged out of care, and just more knowledge overall. Like Veronica said, I felt like I didn't have anyone that I could talk to about stuff like this. I enrolled myself into Montana Western, where I went to college, and I did all of that stuff on my own because I didn't have those parent figures. Even when we went home, my parents were not really involved in any of that, so I had to figure it out on my own. Being in foster care and with all of the trauma that I've been through with my parents and family, I feel like I had to grow up faster than most kids my age, and that was another struggle, and just being able to learn things faster. I had a job when I was young. I was able to maintain that job, and it was without zero supports. It was just stuff that I knew that I had to do, and just taking care of my siblings when my parents weren't around. I had to make sure they were fed, their needs were being met, and all of that. So I think overall, I think it was just hard aging out of foster care and being in foster care as a teenager.
Yeah, I mean, I think back about my teenage years, and I definitely was not in a situation to be able to handle all those adult decisions you guys were encountering. Thinking about your experience and what you see with kids aging out of care now, Do you think we've made progress? Are there areas we can still improve as a system for kids who are exiting foster care?
I think that we have come a long way with a lot of the things that have changed. Like I remember not being able to jump on a trampoline without a permission slip when I was in foster care. And now like kids get to be like compared to where we were, get to be normal. Their foster placement's going to make those changes or like choices for them. And the Chafee program has come a long way compared to what it was, but I think we still need Chafee workers who are more engaged. And there could always be more programming to prepare kids for being adults, especially kids who don't have those appropriate supports and parental figures. I would agree with Veronica. I do think Chafee has come a long way. I do think that things could be a little bit better and more consistent. But I do think that they are becoming better with setting up these youth that are aging out of foster care. I know that they do like goals and stuff with them. And I think the things that Chafee can do, I think overall sets youth that are aging out up for more success. And I do think that's come a long ways.
Thanks, Ashley and Veronica. This next question will start, I think, with Zach, but then we can open it up to anybody. What were the key things that helped you reunite with your family or to find a forever home or adoptive placement? So Zach, we'll start with you. If you can speak to what were the key things that helped you reunite with your little daughter?
Well, I think one of the biggest motivations was being able to have consistent contact, or the opportunity for consistent contact throughout, even during the stages where I was unhealthy and still in active addiction, because those times where I got to spend those hours supervised with my daughter were the thing that kept me going and led me to a place where I was able to walk into my first 12-step meeting, which led me to the place where I was willing to do an evaluation and be honest for the first time in my adult life, and the willingness to go into a treatment center and take the steps to be able to be clean and sober for the first time, to be able to show up as a present parent, and the willingness of the and encouragement of the foster placement was just it's they encouraged me along the way. They noticed when things were getting better. Like I said, like I shared a little bit earlier, they would send pictures, and like the video of my daughter's first steps and what that meant to be able to, even though I wasn't able to be there, but to be able to share in that moment through that connection was really valuable. And also when we finally had a meeting where they asked, where we were determining if we're going to do a reunification or not, and they advocated for her to stay with them because it was the only home she'd ever known. And that's exactly the kind of people that I wanted taking care of my daughter, who were looking out for her best interest as they saw it. But as we move forward with reunification, when my daughter came home and spent the first night home, and I woke up with her the next day, there was a lot of things I didn't know how to deal with as a single dad whose the first diaper I changed was my daughter's. I didn't know how to pack that diaper bag before I came to the visit where I needed to bring my own diapers. And when she got a rash at home after she'd been home for a few days, I called the foster mom and talked through what to do and what I needed to do to take care of the rash. And when things came up, I would call and talk to the foster family. And I got to be part of what it looked like for her to start calling me dad and to stop calling the foster parent dad. And they would come over to our house and have dinner. We would go over there and have dinner. And this is in September of 2018 when this transition started to take place. And here this in 2023 now, they've been a part of our family's life ever since. We've done Christmas with them every year, where we get to, not on Christmas Day, but we always do a holiday event. We celebrate their biological daughter and their new adoptive children's birthdays together. They're now aunts and uncles, an extended part of our family, and they're dear friends. And they absolutely love my daughter, and we adore their children. And we have a relationship today that is something that I just can't put a, I mean, it's just beyond words of what it looks like. I had to have surgery last week, and she spent 3 days with them while I was going through that. And I know that I always have this support of these people, of this family who will always put my daughter's interest first. And I would hope, my hope would be that the ongoing support of placements and the willingness of families like the family that took care of my daughter would be something that we could see replicated. And I know every situation is different, but I can't tell you how valuable it was during the transition of being able to ask for support and knowing that that I was able to build this relationship with them. And I've gotten to be able to watch them adopt two other children and see what that process has looked like for them as they brought children and other foster placements into their home, and then sit in the courtroom and celebrate those adoption days, and then do donuts in the park afterwards. And I'll finish with this. If anyone's interested in actually reading about my family story and the foster family story, Child Bridge did an article this last year, my family story, and then the foster family story. So if you go to Child Bridge's website and stories, you can read about our story from both sides and what it's looked like for us along the journey.
That's awesome. And I know all of us are going to be Googling to follow up on that, Zach. Thanks for sharing. I just totally echo what you say and wanting that for all of our families. It sounds like an amazing partnership you had with the placement. Terry, I'm wondering if you can speak to your perspective on that, having been a adoptive parent and a foster parent, and what we can do as a system to help partner resource parents, foster placements, and biological parents so that we can work more effectively together. And you're muted again.
I haven't had hovering. The transition home, I'm in 100% support of kids being with biological family. The transition for our one kiddo going home was one of the most difficult things I've ever been through. We had him from the hospital till he was 2, and the relationship we were able to develop with his mom was one of the most powerful things, because when he went home, she had that support, he had that support. There wasn't missing gaps in that first year of his life, all that information, and that went home with his mom. One of our other kiddos was working towards reunification and ended up having their parental rights terminated. And his mom and dad are both very active in his life. They come over and pick him up, and they go to the park, or his parents spend the day at motocross races with us, and they spend time with us at various occasions. And I think that the more information people are given about the importance of family connections, whatever those connections be, biological, friends, whatever, the better off all of our kiddos would be. I wish I would have had more training in the beginning about the importance of that, how to engage birth parents. I was not as successful with the first one, but over time you learn that, you develop that, especially if you have a belief system that it needs to be there. So I think that the biggest thing is really that education piece, is really educating everyone about the importance of those connections. And my kids' connections with their birth parents does not eliminate my connection with them. Our connection is still very strong, but they're much more solid children because they have their family. And so I think sometimes we take things personally, and we worry about the loss that we're going to have by accepting this extended family in, and there really isn't one. It's grown by extra people and confidence in all of those other pieces.
Thank you, Terry. This is a question I'm kind of springing on Ashley and Veronica and Zach, so I apologize ahead of time that I haven't previewed it. So if you don't feel comfortable talking about it, it's totally fine to pass. Our theme today is permanency. So I'm curious if you can speak to, as both a child in the system and a parent in the system, whether you were aware of the court in your case talking about permanency and concurrent planning, whether you felt like you had a good grasp of that and that was explained to you maybe by your attorney or by the court, or whether it was just something that never was chatted, never talked to you about.
On my side of things, it was never something that was talked about. I was never given any knowledge of anything that was happening legally with any of the court stuff.
For me, I was more involved with the court case just because I called in the report on my dad and also brought his drugs to school because I knew we needed help and I didn't know what else to do. And so I was super involved. My guardian ad litem was super involved with my case. When I was 17, I had a totally different worker who I, of course, tried to test boundaries with, and I would just say the most off-the-wall things to her, and she just would allow me to say these things, and I'd be like, I'm going to quit school and I'm going to go to job court, and she'd be like, all right, let's look at that. And then I'd be like, I'm not really going to quit school, and she just was so supportive, and she would say, look, I need you to stop running away. Like, you can't take a crotch rocket to Seattle and think that we're going to find you someone who is going to put up with that and be able to like keep you safe. And so she was good about those things and keeping me informed and trying to get me to understand what permanency was and what that meant for me.
Thank you. Zach, if you want to weigh in on that, feel free to, and if you don't, that's fine as well.
What was the question again?
Were you involved in kind of concurrent planning?
Oh, yes, okay.
And was the court
appreciate
talking about permanency in your case?
So I was lost in my head trying to remember the name of the setting where it first came up about about A and B planning.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the meeting where we have the community members that
Oh,
sit
the FCRC, I bet.
Yes,
There
yes, yeah. And so it wasn't until that first FCRC meeting where that came up. And
That was
being
probably
asked,
hard. for that to be the first place that that conversation came up.
Yes, it definitely was. But at the same time, the the placement where my daughter was at was at the time I was still homeless. I wasn't in treatment yet. I was still active. I was still in active addiction, and it was very clear that she was in a safe place. But I didn't. It wasn't. Again, there wasn't, for my case, we didn't have treatment team meetings. It just didn't happen. It wasn't until when I was moved to Missoula and started visit coaching in 2018 that my visit coach through Evolution advocated for a treatment team meeting to happen. And that was the only treatment team meeting that we had, was that one. And then we had the reunification meeting.
Mm.
And so again, that's not that was my experience for our case. And so I feel like the what I've seen in practice of regular treatment team meetings, either weekly or bi-monthly, being implemented has for the families that I've gotten the opportunity to work with, has not reflected what my experience with those treatment team meetings were, and helps that line of communication.
Thank you for sharing. I think we have time for probably one more question, and this will be for everybody. How does your experience with the child welfare system impact the work that you do today with families? And maybe we'll start with Ashley.
So, with my current position as a child protection specialist, I am an intake worker in Butte. Being a youth that aged out, seeing it on both sides, it's just, I've been able to see how important different things are, like maintaining sibling contact, how important visits are with parents and children, how important overall relationships are with these parents that we're working with. We're coming into their lives and completely changing them, removing kids, becoming involved, just making sure that they feel heard and wanted, and just the overall willingness, like if they have concerns, listen to them, and just staying engaged with these families that we work with. I have also, being an intake worker for the last 5 years, I am mindful of how I communicate with these families that I work with, because I do know when I was removed, the way that things were worded, they've kind of stuck with me. So just being mindful of how I'm talking to people, how I'm addressing things, and just being very transparent with parents about when I'm removing, why I'm removing, and what things are going to look like moving forward. With me doing intake, I don't do a lot of the case planning stuff, but when I have had kiddos that I've worked with, just making sure that if it's appropriate and they're old enough, just making sure that they have their say on the case planning. And I do think with being on both sides, now that I'm here, I think just the bouncing. So I had 3 different workers when I was in care, and just having multiple workers, it is so hard to transfer all of the information from each worker. And it seems like it's that there's a lack of being able to build a bond in a relationship with your worker, because it seems like when I was in care, I would start to feel more comfortable with a worker, and then I would get a new worker and have to start everything all over again, and then I wouldn't feel comfortable discussing anything. So overall, I think being in care, it's really changed the way that I do my job in general.
Thanks for sharing. Open it up to anybody on the panel who would like to go next. How does your experience in the child welfare system impact the work that you do today?
I just with all my experience as a foster youth, and then I'm now having a really supportive relationship with my dad. I use him a lot to my advantage with my job. I will call him and be like, listen, like, how would this how would you receive this information? And he will like walk me through things, or are we like, hey, like today was a hard day. And so he walks me through a lot of different things. And like is just really supportive. I never thought that my dad would be so protective over CPS workers. But he calls us the girls. He always says, you girls this and you girls that. And so that has made things really different for me, and I take my job very seriously. Like, this isn't just work for me, this is my life and this is other people's lives. And I always just remind myself, like, we're all one choice away from being on the other side of that table. And how would I want someone to talk to my dad and talk to my sister and talk to me as a 13-year-old who is terrified and doesn't know what to do. And I just am looking for help. And so I really think it's definitely changed who I am as a person and who I am as a social worker.
Appreciate you sharing. Zach or Terry, you want to speak to this?
I can go. So my experience with the child welfare system, as a peer support specialist, I've gotten to be the support that for the families I work with that I wish I had going through the system. When you get involved with the department, everything, and especially from my experience being in active addiction and starting out on the street, like everything is wildly overwhelming, and tasks that get set that seem like they're fairly simple, like making a phone call, setting up an appointment, and showing up, seem like a giant mountain that you can't overcome, let alone getting a list of 6 or 10 of those things that you need to do. And being able to walk alongside people and support them to achieve those tasks and celebrate the little wins along the way, and then also be able to at times be a bridge in communication between the person between the parents and the worker. I always would tell people, please don't call and yell at your caseworker. If you want to call and talk to me, we can yell together and I'll send them a nice email. And then we'll figure out what the answer to what you really want is and see what we can do. And be able to be supportive with parents that if we continue to do the next right thing and we continue to show up and complete our treatment plan, you're going to turn a corner. And all of a sudden, the people that you feel like are your adversaries on the other side of the table are all going to become your advocates, because everybody wants to see you be a healthy parent and your children in your care. And being able to be someone that's evidence of being evidence of that in my life has been really helpful to be able to support parents to be successful. And we really got to celebrate all the wins and the bright lights that we get in this work.
Agreed. And having worked cases with you, Zach, where you were the peer support specialist, you are a huge value add to this whole system. And I know I speak for lots of people on here who thank you, and other peer support folks who do that work. Terry, do you want to weigh in? We've got about a minute left if you want to help us close out the hour.
My role is a little different in that I don't work with families like I used to. But even in an administrative role, I find an important value to what I do. When I reviewed my first kiddo's file at adoption, it was pretty barren. And I have made it a priority in our current work to make sure that files aren't barren. Workers do so much work. Families put in so much effort. All of this work that they do isn't always recognized. And so I try really hard to make sure we're getting documentation of the work that they do, of the work that the families do, or school records or whatever, to make complete files, because it was so hard for me to not have any information on my kiddo prior to the day he came into my care. There were just so many pieces missing, and I don't want another parent or child to be in that same situation because it's really hard. It's really hard to provide them answers to their questions when you just don't know.
Yeah, that's super important stuff that we often kind of forget to tend to, but really is crucial for both placements and biological families. So thanks, Terry. Well, that rounds out our panel. Thank you all so much for sharing with us today. I know that some of this is deeply personal, and I think everybody here is very much appreciative of you. I think I'll now turn it over to Justice Gustafson.
All right. Well, thank you all again for your willingness to come and share your lived experience with us. What we are going to do now, we are going to do a breakout session where you're going to be able to meet with the folks that you generally work with on a day-to-day basis in your child welfare work and discuss some of the data in your area. We have provided you with permanency data for your particular area. Have an opportunity to review that, and what we'd like you to do is pick a facilitator for your group. Also pick a scribe or somebody who will be willing to report out on what you talk about and action plans that you might come up with during the breakout session. We'd like you to discuss, do you see any trends in your data, or what does any of your data tell you, and how does it inform your work? Where do you think you're doing a good job, and are there things that you think from hearing about this morning and looking at the information in your district, what you might do differently, what your barriers are to achieving permanency sooner, and how you might address those barriers and practice ideas and put them into action in the coming months. So my understanding, Julie, is we got about 30 minutes for this.
That's correct.
All right. And so, and when we get back together, we'll do some brief reporting out and then talk about quality improvement project that is going on right now. And then we'll be wrapping it up. So about a half hour here to brainstorm.
All right, I'm gonna move you guys to your rooms. Julie, can you tell me who should go to certain rooms?
Of all of those people,
Yep. They're different. They didn't get into a room, so.
well, I don't have this in an easy format. I don't
Kevin,
have,
this is Corey Harmon. I go to Judge Davies. I know that.
And okay, 1 second here.
And Judge Best and I will go to Judge Best's room. How's that sound?
Let's call that Justice Gustafson's room.
This is Katie Burst. I would go with Judge Davies.
Jessica McGuire Hanson with
One
Judge
second
Davies.
here. I'm sorry. This is going a little fast. So who's up there? Okay, McGuire Hanson going where?
Davies.
But there's this is Bree, where are you going?
I go to Judge Davies.
This is Judge Harada. I should have my own room.
yeah.
Yep, you should. There you go. And then how about Alexander Roth?
I believe he goes into Judge Davies, and this is Katie Burst, and I go in Judge Davies.
This is Shelby Goodman. I go to Judge Davies.
This is Melanie Reimel. I go to Judge Harada.
Roger Renville Davies, please.
lot going into Davies, okay. All right, I just missed, let's go back. April Palmer, where does she go? How about Ashley Walker?
I go to Judge Parker's.
Ashley Walker goes to Judge Harada.
I'm Pam Poon. I put mine in the chat, but I'm also in Judge Parker's room.
Okay, 1 second here. Judge Parker. All right, Austin Wallace.
I'm with Judge Halligan, please.
All right. Brad Nealand.
I'm with Judge Fair.
Okay, Brooke Taylor.
Rieger, please.
Julie. Who are you going with? Yeah.
Hey, I'm in Burgers.
Okay, Judge Berger. Okay, Casey Jones.
Judge Best.
Kimberly Durham.
Judge Harada.
Okay, Lori Greikel.
Judge Harada's.
Okay, Leah McCombs.
Judge Halligan, please.
Okay, Lindsay Berner.
Judge Davies.
Melanie Rimmel.
Judge Harada.
Marcella Stroop.
Judge Best.
Okay. All Judge Rieger goes to Judge Rieger probably.
Danette Love, I go to Judge Rieger.
Okay. Best goes to Best. Sorry, I'm just kind of going down the line here as you guys are showing up. So, how about Chase Rosario? Cindy Bassnett.
Judges Eddie and Kaufman, please.
Okay. Cody Lindsay.
Judge Rieger.
Colleen Timmer.
Judge Halligan, please.
Corey Harmon.
Judge Davies.
Danny Kaufman goes to Kaufman. Okay. David Lord.
Judge Halligan, please.
Eric Bronowski.
Judge Rieger, please.
Gabrielle Weber.
Judge Fair.
Jennifer Blodgett.
Judges Kaufman and Eddie, please.
Okay. Jessica Finley.
Judge Halligan, please.
Jessica McGuire Hanson.
Davies, please.
Jody Black Fusey.
Judges Kaufman and Eddie, please.
Okay. Kim Casey.
Judge Best, please.
Lindsay Bruner.
Judge Davies, please.
And Steve Carl.
Eddie and Kaufman room, please.
And Valerie.
Judge Parker?
And then Chase Rosario, I still don't.
Oh, hi, Kevin. I am with Judge Berger.
Okay. I think that is everyone.
Hi, Kevin. This is Lisa Lecky. You put me in with Judge Davies. I should be in with Judge Whalen.
Okay. And so you're in Davies. Let's go.
You know what? I got out of Davies.
Oh,
I should be
you
with
already
Judge
got out.
Whalen. Yeah.
Okay, I'm not seeing you. So
I'm on the screen. I went back into the main screen. I left the breakout session. I can see myself on the screen.
yeah, I see you on the screen, but I don't see you in my list of so you should be, you said you were in Davies?
I should be with Judge Whalen.
Oh, I see you. I see you were in Davies, so I'm gonna move you to
yes.
Whalen. Okay, so you should be good now. How about Janet, did you want to join somewhere? So,
How's it going?
Are we the only ones in here? No?
I don't know.
Rieger.
You're doing your discussion until then, right?
Yeah, I think everybody's popping back in.
Oh, okay.
I think.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
All right, well, we're all back from our breakout sessions. And so I don't know, Judge Rieger, you want to share what your group discussed?
Yeah, as I continue to talk and didn't even just keep talking. We talked about the permanency of like the federal kind of looking at the department reunification at 12 months, guardianship at 18 months, adoption at 24 months. I brought up a case that we have that's been 1,023 days and that there's still no permanent, that we don't necessarily have a clear idea, or I don't, of what permanency looks like. So I think we discussed that, let's get to it. Like at permanency hearings, if the goal is not permanency, just say it. I mean, if you've had Eric brought up that there's permanency plan meetings that they're doing, which sounds really positive. And at that time, parents should be, getting an idea. But I just kind of expressed from my position that if people are, if the department's goal really isn't permanency, don't say it is because that's what you think you should say. I mean, if we're at 24 months and the parents are not changing, don't come in and say, oh, the goal is reunification if it really isn't. Then we talked about prevention plans and working with families before, and then just the continued contact to achieve efficient permanency between the children and the parents, and engaging the parents, which it sounds like everyone is trying to do.
Well, how about Judge Halligan's group?
And I can go over some of the things, and other members might want to chime in, or Judge Halligan. We did talk about their relationship with the foster parents and how critical that was. But it seemed like one of the really good points that came out is that there's often this lapse of time between engagement of parents from the time they enter the system until they really get engaged, that it might be a year down the road, and the need to continue to be supportive of them visiting and being involved with the child more than just 1-2 hour visit a week, and the resources that might be needed to have that happen. Maybe it means we need a caseworker, perhaps at the department. I don't know, maybe at OPD. We didn't talk about that, but that it's not until you really start talking maybe about some of these non-reunification options that sometimes the parents get motivated. So if we could motivate them earlier, and the best motivation, as we heard from Zach, was being able to be engaged with his child. And then one of the attorneys talked about a family engagement meeting that happened very early on and was super productive to everybody's surprise. So we just maybe need a way to get parents involved a little more. Judge Halligan or anybody else on that team, do you have some more that you want to add to that?
So I don't have anything else. I do think just moving up the opportunities to develop kind of a more trusting relationship, break down some of the barriers and the shame that's involved. So the early family engagement meeting helped the family to address some of those issues. I think we all know that not every family is receptive, but perhaps trying to do that sooner would be better to figure out what really are realistic permanency options. Kind of my goal would be to move from what we seem to be having as a pretty long time in care or time to permanency, to move it back 6 months and maybe begin to keep a little better track of the data. So we have a better sense about is this just outlier cases that we could make some policy changes on, or are there some steps that we could make to kind of help improve the earlier permanency for kids?
I had one more item, which was that we didn't really have the figures. We didn't, that might be helpful for us to gauge how we're doing, because when a child is placed in a fictive kinship placement, that seems to be categorized as in the same situation as a group home, if I'm understanding that right, or a shelter care. That really, we also needed some more for Missoula County rather than our region, because if we really want to see how we're doing for Missoula and Mineral counties, then we need more figures, and we need maybe a little bit. The fictive kinship placement should be called something else in that record keeping.
Interesting. I didn't know that. So I sat in with Judge Best's group, and I don't know who agreed to be our spokesperson.
Well, we didn't achieve an agreement, but I think Michaela's kind of itchy to say something, so I'm going to let her, and Katie, if you want to weigh in, you may as well.
I think that we just discussed a lot of like system barriers that exist in regards to why we struggle with achieving permanency, and that there's not really one area of the case, whether it's, you know, attorneys, judges, CPS, tribes. It's just kind of, there are barriers system wide, and that trying to find a way to come together more collectively to expedite permanency to the best of our abilities is, I think, what needs to happen. I think we've made major progress in our area and our courts with that as of late. And another thing that we noted was that the data was definitely a few years old. And I think to really reflect the current work and the successes that we've had, we would need a little bit more up-to-date data, because 2020 was really, I think, when we started to turn the corner and work more with prevention and try to invest the tribes to the best of our abilities in these cases, and really identify permanency and how we can improve that for children in care. So we think we're doing better than maybe what's reflected.
All right. Well, one of the things that impressed me is that you have a group that is now identified your 72 long stayer cases, and are working, you know, kind of collaboratively to one, see if there's some way to resolve those that are out there, while also, you know, engaging in a lot of other efforts to avoid them getting to that point with your newer cases. And I'm going to share Judge Best's frustration, I guess, because some of you in other counties have had this as well, is that that component of tribal engagement at the outset of a case, and we're continuously trying to figure out new ways to make the inroads there. And so those of you who do work with a lot of tribes, if you have made those inroads and have good suggestions for improving that, we'd be all ears there. So, and Judge Harada, how about we hear from your group?
I really, I don't know where these numbers came from, but I was really impressed with the numbers for my team. It says, if these are accurate, we are doing amazing. We have, for instance, I know these are a little dated, but in 2018, 67% of children were reunified in the first 12 months. And it's always over 50% of kids being reunified in the first 12 months. And then, of course, we see some dwindling of numbers, but we don't have a lot of long stayers or kids that have non-permanency. If you look at the statistics that were provided to us, we did talk about a couple of barriers to permanency, mostly licensing, having family members who wait to be licensed, and then that delays the process, or just being unable to be licensed, which is incredibly frustrating at times when these are people who've actually changed their lives, but maybe had a criminal conviction from much earlier, and now they're they're perfectly safe and fine to provide care. We talked about one of our last trainings was concurrent planning. And really, I know I approach all cases this way, is we start concurrent planning from the very beginning, always. And I think that helps with achieving permanency in a more timely manner. So I think my group is incredible. I think everybody's working really, really hard to find permanency options for kids. And if these numbers that were provided to me are accurate, I'm really proud of everyone and their efforts.
All right. And Judge Eddy and Judge Kaufman, I think you both were in the same group.
Danny, you want to give the report?
I don't know what I missed at the beginning.
There. We
So
started
no.
with half our group. So our permanency numbers are actually pretty good from a statistical perspective, but we did notice that our days to permanency increased dramatically in the last little while. We have not had any children re-enter care, hardly zero for the last year and very few for the years before then. And so we discussed how maybe we're being too cautious in keeping kids in care longer than is necessary, but yet they're not coming back into the system, and how we have a conversation about that on individual cases. We have always done status hearings here. We've always discussed concurrent planning. So I did cringe a little bit when Justice Gustafson was talking about permanency hearings, because that's pretty much how ours have gone. Once we get to the permanency plan hearing, I take judicial notice of an affidavit that was filed in support of the petition to adopt the permanency plan, and I rubber stamp it because it's for reunification and then something else. So we did talk about how we could have, a stricter conversation at the permanency plan hearing about that follows up on all of those more informal conversations that we have been having over the months. And we also candidly acknowledge that we have very, very little racial or ethnic diversity in Flathead County, and that is reflected in our removals. We usually only have a handful of Native American kids, and usually they are not from an in-state tribe. They are from an out-of-state tribe. We didn't talk about that specifically, but that's my observation.
Interesting. So, and I know, I think I have Judge Fair on, someone from her group, maybe?
Yeah, that's me. We kind of talked about that. There's a lot of focus, like on the beginning of cases, that we spend a lot of time focusing on permanency and getting things moving in the beginning, but we don't necessarily always focus on the delays that are occurring as we're finalizing permanency, such as the time it takes to sometimes get adoptions done after the adoption packet has been turned into our licensing department. There's kind of a delay in guardianships and getting that done. And sometimes they're needed like pro-tunc orders due to misspelled names, or, a delay in getting court orders. Like sometimes it can take a couple months for us to get those from the county attorney's office. So we just talked about that. Maybe there just needs to be better collaboration between attorneys and the department and Helena, like as we finalize our kids' permanency plans, and that might help with those numbers that we have. And then we just kind of talked about how everyone feels that status hearings are really important and that they really do add benefit to the case and to all parties and keeping us all on track.
All right. And I guess Judge Davies, anyone from your group want to talk?
Sorry,
Maybe
I was
she's-
muted.
Oh,
we didn't talk about a spokesperson, so I'll just briefly tell everybody what we talked about. I think the theme of our conversation was collaboration, setting a collaborative tone in these hearings whenever possible, and encouraging transparency along the way. A good example of that was Jessica from the department had indicated that if she ever is communicating about something that's gone awry for a parent, she always CCs on the email the parent so that parents know what to expect and they don't come into court feeling like they've been ganged up on in a surprise attack. Just really working on having open communication and encouraging parents to view the court process as a team approach designed to reunite kids. We did have some discussion about making parents, aware that there's a timeline to this, and that they really are, there is a stopwatch, and to make sure they understand that this is not, a float to the finish, it's a swim to the finish. And there was an interesting conversation about having dialogue early on, potentially at, show cause, to better explain to parents what every person's role at the table is in the proceedings. There's a lot of folks who they see only during the hearing, and maybe not having an understanding of the fact that we're all rooting for their success. And so to have dialogue about what they bring to the table and the whole idea, of course, is that better engagement will bring better outcomes more quickly. You're muted now, Justice Gustafson.
Have I missed any groups? Any other comments anyone wants to make at this time?
There was also Judge Berger's group.
Okay, I knew I was missing somebody.
And Judge Whalen when we're
Whalen too.
And Judge Whalen.
So-
So anyone from Judge Berger's group?
Yeah, this is Laura. I'll be happy to share a little, and I think Katie probably has some information too. That particular judicial district is relatively small numbers of kids in care, so there was a big focus on numbers versus percentages, because if you just look at the percentages, it was difficult to sort of get a good understanding regarding the youth that are being served. I mean, everyone feels like the work that's being done in his court has really been effective. There's been a lot of status hearings, orders are being done timely. He is very open to having youth engaged in the court process as well. And there was a lot of focus on how we can better involve the youth's voice in court as well. And what can be done as far as the attorney's roles, the CASA's roles, workers' roles, etc. Let's see. We also talked about that really the barrier to permanency is finding homes for some of the youth who have some behavioral issues, and being able to find that permanency piece for them so they aren't aging out of care, and really needing a strong focus there. And I don't know if anyone else has anything else to add.
Well, and I will just add on to what Laura was saying too. I think that the age out rate in Beaverhead County specifically can really be tied to Laura showed us the numbers, the age that the child is when they enter care, right? And so when you have such small numbers and then you have older kids like that enter the system, I think that that's the explanation right there.
All right, and how about someone from Judge Whalen's group?
Sure. So just real quickly, I think the one thing we noticed was that in that courtroom or that county, there's been significant progress and timeliness to permanency. So you can see in 2000, looking at the data in 2019, that area was way different than the rest of the state as far as reunification within 12 months. And now by 2021, they're up with the same with the rest of the state. So that was significant progress. And the same for permanency within 24 months. So there's been a lot of focus on our kids that are in care under 24 months there, and the data shows it. So that was exciting to see. And we had a pretty small group, so I don't know if anyone else had anything interesting to say.
Well, all right. It sounds like we've had a lot of good discussion and a lot of different things going on in different jurisdictions. And so I I guess I'll ask you all to overnight if there are things that you want to add to this discussion. We'll have time again tomorrow for that. Right now, though, we're going to move on to Nikki Grossberg is going to fill us in or educate us about the Quality Improvement Center on Engaging Youth in Finding Permanency and give an update with regard to that. And then Nikki, also a few people I noticed when we talked about, looking at their data or whatnot, there seems to be a sense that some of our data is old that we have provided, right? And so maybe you can explain a little bit like how hard it is to get our real data, our up to the minute data and, at least what is, are we seeing shifts in that of what we provided people already? So.
Sure. So thinking of the data, you have to remember when we're looking at permanency data, it is a look back. So that's why you report back 2022, like 2020 data, even though it's 2023, because you have to let the kid in care that time period expand out. So it does always look a little bit different with permanency data. These are the federal requirements, and this is how we present APGAR's data. So we provide them the APGAR's data every 6 months. So they have our current data, but you can't talk about a kid in care for 36 months until they've been in care 36 months. So that is some of the components with the permanency data. We do have the ability to pull a little bit different permanency data through what we call our empath process, and could look at where is there any more timely data. Like we could look at the 2023 and you'll see that, like, so if you think about the kids in care reaching permanency within 12 months, like we could pull all the kids in care who came into care in 2022 or 2023 and see if they've reached permanency within the 12 months they're in care. So there is some work we could do internally. I will always caveat that with is we do not have a full-time data person. So every time I ask for data, it is taking a person away from the other work they're supposed to be doing. But
well, I guess what my concern was is that there's a sense, that this group, all these people that are on today, are people that have been diligently working for the last few years on improving their work and the system that they're in. And that there is a bit of a sense that maybe if we had, data for today, that the last 2 years would show that we are really addressing permanency and maybe are doing better than maybe our numbers reflect. And I just want to get a sense from you, is that a reasonable assumption?
Well, the data I presented at the judges conference, for those who were there, was the most current data we have in our system. And it's similar, right? I mean, we are trending in the right way with the exception of our long stayers. So our permanency in 12 months, if you remember, that is, continues to do well. Same with 24 months is probably where we've made our progress. But it is those that have been in care over 36 months that we're still struggling with. Right. So. But I can send out that data that I did at the judges conference.
Sure, that would be helpful, I think. Additionally, I guess, just along these lines, I'd like to kind of fill people in a little bit. It's my understanding that the department is right now, in response to the performance improvement plan and the long stayers, we really are trying to identify each of those cases that are out there and work with judges and stakeholders in each of the areas to be addressing, are some of those cases, can we clear them up? Are they really long stayers? Did they fall through the cracks, et cetera? And really look at those, not only to kind of clear up what's out there while we're doing good work to try to avoid that in the future. And I wanted to bring that up because I think some people on this call may be asked to be engaged in looking at some of the cases in their area as we go through this process. Is that accurate?
Judge Gustafson, that's like spot on. Exactly. Like we want to look at what's currently our long stayers, but that is also then when we think about this Quality Improvement Center on Engaging Youth and Finding Permanency, it's kind of one of our other proactive approaches. So as time goes on, we have less and less long stayers. So
So I'll quit interrupting you and let you get to that.
So just real quick, I know we got 4 minutes. It's the end of the day. Appreciate all the conversation that we've had. But for those of you just wanting to let you know, we have Child and Family Services Division has engaged with some technical assistance on really looking at permanency and engaging youth in that. The goal of this project is really to advance the child welfare system and engaging and empowering children and youth in an authentic way as it relates to permanency decisions. So you heard from our panel today how little they were involved when they were kids in care. That is a piece we're trying to change. It's a 5-year project, and there's a significant evaluation component to it. So the University of Washington is doing the evaluation. We're one of 8 states and 1 tribal nation participating in this project. So I think that's pretty exciting for Montana. We have a group of about 11 youth who have been in the foster care system or aged out. Their age range is from 17 to 26. So really have some good voice of youth who have experienced this, really guiding this project. The project has a variety of different components, from training for our CPS workers, some coaching for our supervisors. But for you guys, most relevantly, there's also legal training. So a variety of you guys have received an email, probably from Kelly Sather, regarding doing the legal training. We really encourage you guys to do that. It's an online training. We need 70 participants, and it can be attorneys, judges, CASAs. But the challenge with this project is because there's an evaluation component, there are pilot sites and there's comparison sites. And so only you guys that are in a pilot site would have got this email. So if what I'm saying makes no sense to you, that's because you're a comparison site. And the idea is that after this evaluation, if the project shows what we think it's going to show, we would roll it out statewide. But so for those of you on, let's see, Judge Whalen, Judge Rieger, Judge Berger, Judge Best, and Judge Parker's teams, you guys would be potentially folks we would love to do that training. If you didn't get that email and you want it, let me know. I'll get it back out there. Again, the goofy thing is if you are an attorney, like a public defender who practices in those courts, but also practices in, let's say, Missoula courts, you can't be part of it. So there's really strict research criteria with this project, which has created some challenges, but also recognize why it's important. The training was developed by the American Bar Association and the National Association for Representing Children. So some really high quality training that I think could be beneficial to our state, especially when we get to move it statewide. So wanted to just highlight this project, more to come. Like I said, it's a 5-year project. We just started year 3. So hope to really engage with the attorneys for children in those areas as more and more get appointed so that they can understand what that's going to look like. One of the interventions that's being developed is a foster care orientation for youth, where they could come to a meeting and really understand more about the system as a group. So appreciate you guys. Let me kind of wrap up with that. I do think that this project will hopefully help really that permanency outcomes for kids and really advancing their voice in the system as we move forward.
All right. Well, we're almost exactly on time. We don't really know what the glitch has been with our Zoom and why people had to re-register. We are hoping that tomorrow that will not be the case, but I would ask that you connect a few minutes early in case we run into that problem, which we're hoping not to tomorrow. We are going to start at 8:30 in the morning tomorrow. I want to thank everyone for their time today and your participation. If you have questions from today's materials or sparked more discussion, please bring them with you tomorrow and put them in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll get some discussion going on that then. So I'm going to wish everyone to have a good rest of their day. Julie, is there anything else we need to talk about before we wrap up for the day?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Well, thanks again, and we'll see everyone tomorrow morning at 8:30.
Thank you.
Thank you.